In this second video on stacks and queues, we're going to look at them in a little bit more detail. We're going to go through the basic algorithms for adding, removing and deleting items from stacks and queues, as well as looking at some of the variants of queues, such as circular and priority queues. Okay, so let's start with stacks. Now just a reminder, stacks are a last in, first out data structure, which means the last item you push onto a stack will be the first item which you pop or remove off. So let's look at the basic algorithm for inserting an item onto a stack. The first thing we have to do is check if the stack is full. If the stack is full, we report an error and stop. This is an important part to remember in an exam. It's often worth a mark and candidates often miss it out. So before inserting to a stack, check if stack is full. If it is, stop, report an error. Assuming the stack isn't full, we then need to increment this pointer from here to here, and then we can insert or push our new item onto the top of the stack here. Okay, so let's now take a look at deleting or reading an item for a stack. So the first thing we do is check to see if the stack is empty, and if it's empty, report an error and stop. Okay, assuming it's not empty, we now copy the data item being pointed to by the top of the queue, that's this one here. We copy it out, and then we decrement the stack pointer so it's now pointing to the number 14. So this is now the top of the queue. Notice that reading and deleting items from a stack is basically the same, because remember in computing we never actually delete stuff, we only really override it. So when we're reading something from a stack, we'll be pulling the item out that's at the top of the stack and copying it, and it will likely be being assigned to some kind of variable. So the item's being copied out and then assigned into, say, this variable x. The pointer then gets decremented. If we delete, we simply decrement the pointer. It's the same thing. This 12 doesn't disappear, it's just that the stack is now pointing to the top item here as 14. So when we insert a new item, we increment the pointer, and then we end up overwriting what was there. Okay, now let's have a look at queues. Now remember, queues are first in, first out data structures, therefore they need two pointers. There's the pointer here pointing to the front of the queue where items leave, and a pointer pointing to the back of the queue where items join. If we want to add to a queue, we first check to see if the queue is full, and if it's full, we report an error and stop. Assuming the queue isn't full, we increment the back pointer, so it goes from 2 to 3, and then we insert our new item at the back of the queue, because items join the back of the queue. If we want to delete or read items from a queue, we first check to see if the queue is empty, and if the queue is empty, stop and report an error. Assuming the queue isn't empty, we want to remove from the front or head of the queue, so we copy the item out here, being pointed to by the head of the queue, and now this item's left the queue, the head of the queue is now pointing here, to position 1, or data item B. So that's the basics of adding, removing and reading from stacks and queues. Just a couple of extra points. It is also quite simple to implement a queue, not in a linear fashion, but as a circular queue. So here's how we'd visualise an empty circular queue. The concept here is this queue has 16 elements to it, numbered 0 to 15, and the head and the back of the queue here are at the same position, and this is how you would most likely see it in an exam, visualised as a kind of flat left to right data structure, the idea being that this queue wraps around. With an empty queue like this, an empty circular queue like this, you know the queue is empty when the head and tail pointer are pointing to the same element. And here is exactly the same queue, but this time with data in it. So item gets added here to the back of the queue, one at a time, and items leave from the front of the queue here, as so. This is what a full queue would look like if it's implemented in a circular fashion. We can see here we're now checking if the queue is full, and it's full if the tail pointer is one less than the head pointer. In other words, if we had to increment the tail pointer one more to add something to it, it's at the same position. It would then be at the same position as the head pointer. Another popular type of queue, often used in many areas of computing, is the idea of a priority queue. Now this acts just like a normal queue, except that the logical order of items within the queue is determined by their priority. So we place high priority items or higher priority items towards the front of the queue and lower priority items at the back. What this essentially means is that items joining a queue could join at the front, the back, or part way. So here's a simple example. Think of an A&E triage ward at a local hospital. We may initially have two people who've arrived at the A&E, one with a broken leg and one with a headache. Well, there's only one doctor, let's say, available at the moment, so the person with the broken leg, you would hope, would go to the front of the queue, and the person with the headache behind them. However, then in comes someone with a heart attack. Well, you would hope in this circumstance that this person wouldn't be sitting at the back of the queue behind the person with the broken leg and the headache. Even though they've come in afterwards, they've jumped to the front of the queue. Here we have someone who's come in with a severe allergic reaction, and again there'd be some kind of prioritisation. Possibly that this is less important to be dealt with than the heart attack, but more important than the person with a broken leg or a headache. So we have this concept of prioritising. Let's actually take this out of the abstract a little bit and try and relate it a bit more to computing. So here we have the front of our priority queue and the back of our priority queue. And this is a queue for prioritising jobs that have access to the processor. Now, scheduling algorithms deal with this in computing, and we'll look at these in more detail in another part of the course and other videos. But let's start by assuming there are two initial jobs in a queue and they're both waiting for time of the processor to execute. They are considered, for this example, to be normal priority jobs, and that's running a web browser and a spreadsheet. And as such, they join the queue one at a time, the web browser first, and then the spreadsheet joins at the back. We then have a brand new job enter the queue, and it's a request to access the printer. This has an even lower priority, so it simply follows the rules of the queue and it joins at the back of the queue. A fourth job now enters, and this is a request to check your firewall. Maybe a piece of traffic has come in from outside the network, and there's a request to the firewall to check, and so the firewall software needs the attention of the processor. This is considered by this scheduler to be a high priority request. So instead of joining the back of the queue, everything else is shunted back and it ends up at the front.